We've got a nice round number of episodes that we're getting into here on the Just Start the Conversation podcast. It's brought to you by St. Luke's University Health Network as we hit episode, Amie Alanson Dundon, number 30 of this podcast.
30. That's a great number. 30's a good year, right? 30's good.
30's a good year.
Not that we've done it for 30 years, but like in general, like 30's good.
30 is good, and a good number for podcasts. I don't think most make it past 3, so here we are. And a great way to celebrate today. We've got quite the guest with us today, Allentown Mayor Matt Tuerk, to discuss breaking and reducing the stigma around mental health. Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm incredibly glad to be here. I was just telling Amie this is like one of my favorite topics.
We're so excited.
I feel like that's a really good place to start then. So help us kind of understand where that motivation comes from for you.
I think it's in part because of like a personal journey around mental health. And, you know, we're going to talk more about breaking the stigma related to mental health. But it is my own experience with addressing my own challenges related to mental health and kind of embracing it and finding that when people have a level of self-awareness or a level of engagement with their mental health, it just it gives them a chance to be more of who they want to be. So when I can, part of what we do as mayors is we try to encourage people to be their best selves. And I think part of being your best self is being keyed into your own mental health. So that's what makes it a favorite topic for me.
Amie, I kind of want to piggyback off of what Mayor Tuerk said there. I feel like that self-realization is such an important part in the first step of trying to take on any mental health issues that you may be dealing with. For someone that is obviously very familiar in the space, talking to people all the time, how can we encourage people to take that first step? What might be that first step for somebody to try to start a conversation around their mental health?
So I think first of all, it's important to kind of own our own stuff, right? And when I say that, I mean really be honest with yourself about the emotional stuff that might be going on inside that's hard to talk about, right? So is it anxiety? Is it depression? Am I having thoughts that maybe I'm scared to talk about with somebody else? Do I have a trusted friend, colleague, coworker, support system that I can go run something by? It's important to, and we've talked about this on the podcast a lot, but I think it's important to teach our little ones how to do that, and that it's okay to do that. So folks like you, Mayor, being able to openly talk about your own mental health issues really is a good step to giving others permission to do that same thing, right? Because if you're willing to open up to say, hey, I've experienced X, Y, or Z, let's talk about it. Somebody might hear that and say, oh, well, if the mayor's willing to talk about it, because really, let's face it, I think we all have mental health, emotional stuff. Mm-hmm. You don't get to be a human on this planet without facing some level.
Well, as a mayor in the 21st century, I get to spend time with other mayors from around the country, and things are changing for leaders who are in the public eye. Mm-hmm. And I think in the past, there might have been this idea that, the mayor or the governor or the president or the senator needed to be kind of a stoic figure and needed to be always tough and always strong, mm-hmm. and just this portrait of invincibility. And I think that in this new era, and it's something that I like about being in a position like mayor now, is that there's more of an ask for us to reflect the needs of our community. And I look at myself as a representational mayor. I'm the first Latino mayor of a majority Latino city. Mm-hmm. And I think that particularly when I'm talking, whether it's talking to anybody in the city, but particularly to young people, I show them that whatever's going on in their lives, whatever they might be, you can't see with the suit, but I'm like covered in tattoos, and I wear, actually you can see. There, I'm like
nice.
the sneaker mayor.
I like it.
I look more like the people that I serve, and I also sound more like the people that I serve. And when I can say to somebody, "Hey, I know what it's like to struggle with a relationship with a family member. I know what it's like to have self-doubt. I know what it's like to just have these things going on inside, and it's okay to talk about those things." And when you have that the support network, I think the other thing that we do as mayors is we let people know that we're there for them. So if you don't have somebody else to talk to, I try to be the mayor that you can talk to. And that's important.
It's super important, I think. How did you break that stigma for yourself?
It's funny. So oddly enough, I'm the child of academics. My mom and dad both went to, they did graduate programs at University of South Carolina, or excuse me, that was me, South Carolina. My parents were at University of Colorado. My dad did a PhD in molecular biology, and my mom started a doctoral program in psych, and she eventually did a master's in psych. But we had this kind of family stigma. Crazily enough, with somebody who's getting a master's in psychology, we had this family stigma about getting mental health support. And so I kind of held that as a younger person and as a self-directed person. I always had this idea that I was going to figure it out for myself and I didn't need to go get help from anybody. And I can remember vividly, my wife and I had been married for a few years, and I think we had both of our kids at that point, and we were struggling with our relationship. And it was always like, we're going to figure it out for ourselves. And finally, it just got to the point where my wife was like, look, I'm calling a therapist. We're going to go to couples therapy. And I was like, I wasn't exactly pushing back, but I wasn't also like jumping up to do it myself.
Yeah.
And when she called the therapist, I was like, oh, great. Somebody just opened the door for me. And just walking in and starting cognitive behavioral therapy was incredible. And it was an opportunity for us to have a neutral party that we could talk to about what we were going through as a couple. And that was really managing the relationship.
Yeah.
And taking that first step into getting professional help for our challenges allowed us each to go into our separate directions and
work on yourselves.
And work on ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And that was, so getting into cognitive behavioral therapy was the first step for me, and it opened up a lot.
Right. And I'm sure that the things you learned in marital therapy and that cognitive behavioral framework you've used daily in your life going forward.
Absolutely. One of the things, so I was seeing a therapist here in Bethlehem probably 10 years ago. And I remember I was struggling. My brother-in-law was at our house, and it was the holidays. And I was just struggling with my relationship with him and kind of what I expected. And it was really, I think historically I would have placed the blame outside of myself, and I would have said like, well, this is my brother-in-law and he's an absolute jerk, and he's why I'm struggling right now and making me miserable. And through the work that I did in therapy, I recognized like, well, this is about me and my expectations and about the challenges and things that I have and my inability to accept people for who they are and my demand that people change. And I can remember coming out of that therapy session and driving back to Allentown and just kind of repeating over and over again that I will accept Eric for who he is.
Huge.
And it was a huge thing for me. And that, along with some self-care stuff that I was doing around running, I'm a marathon runner, and I always kind of took care of my physical health, and some exploration of some mindfulness techniques. Those things together just unlocked everything, and my life really changed as a result of that.
I'll tell you what, therapy opens doors that people just don't talk about. I was talking the other day with one of our medical doctors, and who agreed, we should have medical physicals annually and mental health physicals annually. It should just be a thing. And when you were talking about your brother-in-law, the question that I always ask people when they start to come in and say, I'm having so much trouble with my wife or with this family member or with this person, my response is always, what role do you play in that dysfunction?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's where self-exploration starts, and that's where we start to get a sense of, do I have unrealistic expectations of others because of my own insecurities or my own anxiety or my own expectations? But I think it's always important to bring it back to yourself and start to own your stuff. Yeah.
And I think one thing that is interesting, so as I reflect upon that story, I think about, I was in a relationship with my wife who loved me and I loved her, and I was privileged enough to be employed and have a job where I had insurance and healthcare available to me, and I had a support network. I have friends. I had a lot of these pieces of the puzzle around me, and that made it easier to get into that world of health. But I what I say to people who might not have those things, that there's still ways to embrace that work, right? And there's still resources available to you, whatever they might be. The courage, that courage to start. I think that if I had had people telling me at the time, instead of my parents growing up telling me that you didn't need therapy or you didn't need to work on your mental health, if I had people who were telling me at the time that it was okay and that it was okay to need to work on yourself, I think things might have been different. And that's part of why it is one of my favorite topics, is to talk to people about, it is okay. That we do need these checkups, right? We need to check up on our physical health. We also need to check up on our mental health. And all the while, we still also need to develop these practices, right? So when you go to, I think more people might be familiar with physical health issues where you need to go to the doctor and then you need to do those things to take care of yourself. Or like my grandmother was a dentist, right? So like you go to the dentist for your couple of times a year checkup and cleaning, but then you also have to brush your teeth every day, right? So when you are doing the mental health things, it's good to go and see that therapist every so often, but you also need to find those practices.
You got to put the work in.
Absolutely. So for me, it's an everyday meditation practice. For some people, it might be an everyday prayer session. For some people, it might just be, you can find that thing that you can anchor on and make that part of your regular practice. But understand, I think the thing that everybody should understand is there's always a path.
Oh yeah. If you like to write, maybe it's journaling. If you like to, do art, maybe it's drawing or coloring, whatever that is. It's all, you mentioned mindfulness. That's all a part of mindfulness.
Yeah.
Right. Is being present for yourself and being present in the here and now and not getting caught up in the worry.
And that's not easy. That does require practice.
Oh, tons. It takes a lifetime. I don't know anybody that's self-actualized.
I think even if you, and I think that's part of this, part of the work, the mindfulness work, is that recognition that you're never going to hit that thing. That it's a daily practice, and the more you practice in mindfulness and meditation, the more that you see that you've got that it's an ongoing journey, right?
Yeah, and it takes time to build up, right? I mean, mindfulness, to really learn how to do guided imagery or meditation or yoga or one of those kind of alternative healing arts practices, you start for 2 minutes and then you work up to 3 and then you work up to 4. I mean, this isn't, you sit down and you sit with your legs crossed and you close your eyes for 30 minutes and you're healed. It doesn't work. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way.
Well, and even I've been practicing meditation for more than 10 years now. And guess what? Like this morning, I was doing my mindfulness meditation and I got distracted because that's part of it. You're going to get distracted. It's not like you're not immediately hitting Zen.
No, I don't think I hit Zen for 2 years.
But it's also, the other, I think
who's counting, right?
But who's counting?
Yeah.
You also, I think one of the important things for people to understand is that it's okay to recognize and work on yourself and recognize that we're all on a mental health journey. And the other is that even when you feel like there aren't resources available to you, if you might not have the relationship with a therapist, or you might not have a program at work, there are things that you can do that are relatively inexpensive. The mindfulness practice is something that really anybody can start on.
Oh yeah, you don't need insurance for that.
Right. Well, and it's funny. So I grew up poor. I gravitate toward the physical activities that don't require a lot of investment, right? Yeah. So I was like a basketball player all the time as a kid, because really all you needed was a basketball. And hopefully you had a hoop around you. And now as a runner, it was, there's nothing stopping. You don't need to be heavily invested in running shoes. Exactly.
Some sort of sneaker.
Get out there and run. Right. And with mindfulness, you just need to sit down and really just 10 minutes a day can get you there.
Yeah. And, you know, if you don't know how to start, if you have access to any sort of internet, all you have to do is Google or YouTube 10-minute mindfulness, and you can find something out there that will, you know, help guide you through that. There's lots of apps, of course, that you can download, and there's lots of materials out there. But I do think part of it is being able to be open with the people we're with every day and open that conversation with folks to say, you know, hey, my anxiety is really bad this week. You know, I need 30 minutes, you know, in the shower to just kind of decompress. I'm going to take a time out to just start to verbalize how we're feeling.
I had a friend, so this was a hard week for me. I think this is going to air later, but part of, and this is another reason why I do like talking about this, is that, so it is telling people in your community that it's okay to not be okay. And it's also telling other people within your profession that you need to find some time for yourself. So this week, I'm a big pedestrian guy. I'm a big roadway safety guy. And this week, a young person was killed. An Allentown middle schooler was killed crossing a street in Whitehall. And that hits hard. And I was at an event. It was like a strategic planning event for the Allentown School District, and I was lucky enough to have a friend who could see I was struggling, and she pulled me aside. She's like, "Why don't you just like step outside for 10 minutes? Like just go outside and just take a breath of fresh air. Just don't, you know, leave your phones here and just go outside or just take a minute." And having friends, having that network that is helping you and encouraging you to do those things, to find that minute for yourself. And that's something that I think everybody you can work toward, that not everybody's born self-aware, and some people, it takes a lot of work to become self-aware, but that recognition, the opening yourself to self-awareness is a really important thing. And that recognition that like we all need it. We all, and particularly people in leadership positions, need to find a time. Like we can't shoulder it all by ourselves. We need the help.
Kudos to your friend for recognizing that you needed a minute and saying it. I'm really lucky to have people like that. And that's what, again, when I talk to people in the city of Allentown, I want them to know that like the mayor's there thinking about that too. Right. And so the mayor needs friends saying, "Hey, why don't you take a minute?" And the mayor can be your friend to say, "Hey, I can see that you're struggling. Right. This is, things might not be going exactly how you want it to go. Just take a minute, right? Take a minute, take a beat, take a breath, and let's come back to this." Like there's very few things that are so urgent that you can't take that beat. Yeah. Our thoughts and prayers certainly go out to that young person and their family. It's very sad.
It is. It's hard. And that's, you know, people say like, well, you know, there's good days and there's bad days in being a mayor. And I think that's true whether you're a mayor or you're a doctor or you are a police officer or you're a, you know, engineer. There's good days and there's bad days. And I think that I think everybody should understand that whatever position you're in, there's good days and there's bad days. And I recognize that some people that in my community, they have bad days and we're here for them.
Yeah, and I think part of breaking the stigma of mental health is, again, I'm going to bring back the word owning the fact that I'm having a bad day or I'm having a bad hour or, you know, there's some really bad news that just hit and I'm not sure how to handle it. But we all need to give each other permission to handle that, as if you had gone out and broken your leg yesterday and you walked in here, we would all be, "Oh my gosh, what are you doing to heal your leg? What's your recovery going to look like?" We need to give our mental health that same attention. How's your depression? How's your recovery going? I'll be happy when we get to that point. But this is the way we start, right?
I think, you know, one of the people that I spoke with, I remember vividly talking to a friend who, he's not a mental health professional, but he's kind of in this space, or he's adjacent to the space. And I remember talking to him before I ran for mayor, and we just met, and I was just incredibly open and vulnerable with him, and he was completely like taken aback. He's like, "That is not what I expected to hear from somebody who's running for mayor." Right? They were like, that's unusual. And it wasn't unusual to me because I've always been very like I've embraced like who I am. I've at least learned to embrace who I am. And part of that is being very open. So I think that people are sometimes taken aback that they'll see me on the street and they'll say, "Hey, Mayor, how you doing?" And I'll be like, "Well, not a great day." And they're like, "What?" What? The mayor is saying it's not a great day. What's going on? And I'm just pretty candid and honest with people and vulnerable and let them in a little bit. And I think that in public positions like this, you become a model and you let other people know that, again, like you can be vulnerable with people. You can let people know what's going on, and if we're sensitive to each other, then we can recognize, that this person's struggling with a pedestrian fatality, or they're getting beaten up publicly for a decision that they made, or whatever it is.
Yeah. Are you worried about getting flack for being vulnerable? Do you worry about it?
I don't think so. I think it's funny, and not to get terribly political, but we have, we're approaching a presidential election. We have two candidates, one of whom is very much like a kind of strong and kind of classically masculine, tough figure, and the other is more of a compassionate and sympathetic figure. And I think that there's this concern always that like you don't want to look weak or whatever, or like you said, get flack for being vulnerable. But I'm willing to pay the price, whatever price there might be associated with that. Like we're only in the positions that we're in for whatever it might be for a very short period of time. I mean, part of what happens in mindfulness meditation is that you get very comfortable with uncertainty very quickly. And I don't know where I might be tomorrow, so I want to make sure that I live my ideals today. And
I love that.
My ideals today are being candid and honest and vulnerable with people, because that's what I hope people will give to me as well. I want to live in a world in which we're kind of where we're humans toward each other. And I think, again, like if I had a broken leg, you'd be sensitive to me. Similarly, like, if you had, right now I'm having, some allergy issues, some a little more congested, but if I saw you had a cold, there'd be a level of sympathy, right?
Yeah, sure.
And if you can show me that you're struggling with whatever thing, then I'm going to treat you with the care that you deserve, right? And that's what we should do for each other.
Agreed.
Mayor Tuerk, you kind of mentioned a couple of different points in your life where perhaps there was a stigma attached to mental health. You mentioned the stoic characteristics of a person in a mayoral position, a position like you're in. And you mentioned that your parents didn't think you needed to work much on your mental health. Aside from those, which is obviously very early in your life and probably the most recent events in your life, across your path with mental health, obviously you mentioned going to couples counseling. Was there ever moments where you experienced stigma beyond? Listen, you're Mayor Matt Tuerk. People know you for this position. Beyond that, coming up through this mental health journey, where maybe you experienced some stigma that you just felt like, man, I really need to squash this right now and embrace, kind of, as Amie keeps saying, owning your stuff.
I think about the stigma. There might be some external things that aren't my own personal experience, where I'll see other folks that are kind of focused on this. I guess it'd be like a veneer of strength and toughness. But most of my experience has not been around. It has been around people who might be a little afraid. So that less about kind of portraying themselves as being really strong, and more around people who might be afraid to talk about things that are going on in their lives. And I think that wherever possible, I've tried to, and I know, it's always tricky to talk about these things because I'm happy to talk about my own experiences, but I can't always, some of these stories are not mine to tell, right?
Sure.
So, if I talk broadly about a member of my family who who struggled with some mental health issues that resulted in a hospitalization that they in another environment might have been afraid to talk about, but they instead, and I like to think that in part it's because I encouraged them to own it, but they owned it, right?
Yep.
And they have taken their experience, and without being too evangelistic about it, they've used their experience to help other people as well.
And you know what we call that? We call that post-traumatic growth. I mean, that's the mental health term for that, right? It's when, if you think about nature and you think about how fragile flowers and plants are, and they can go through a frost or freezing cold temperatures and come back and sprout new leaves. And, you know, in the world of psychiatry, we call it PTG, post-traumatic growth. And it is a growing topic of discussion, but that's what you describe as somebody that is able to kind of own their stuff, get the treatment they need, talk openly about it, which then promotes, the word in post-traumatic growth is anti-fragility.
Yeah.
Being anti-fragile, right? We used to call it resilience, you know, and now it's anti-fragile.
There's still, I mean, and I think there's still some people, so I'm thinking of, again, not in my personal life, but in the professional life, with people who had a particularly traumatic incident, and they're dealing with it, and they're not necessarily dealing with it in the best way, because it might be, you know, related to some stigma that they might feel. They might be working through things, but there's people who deal with, particularly in this line of work, there's people who are dealing with traumatic incidents all the time. And I think rather than, you know, again, I'm always sensitive to the idea that, like, everybody needs to own their stuff all the time, and everybody needs to, like, be totally in tune. Like, I would say the contrary is that everybody's on a journey, right? And some people are not ready to own that stuff yet.
Agreed. You know, just like some people are diagnosed with high blood sugar and aren't ready to deal with that prediabetes, right? You have to be in a spot where you're ready to take it on.
Absolutely. And all we can do, and this is again where I come from as a mayor, and as part of my job is as a CEO. Like, I run an 870 person organization, and I'm concerned about the mental health and welfare of 870 employees at the city of Allentown that go through a host of different things. We just need to be there for them, so that when they're ready to own their stuff, as you said, that we're ready for them, and that we're providing the resources that they need that allows them to do that work. And, you know, I like to think, you know, you try to make yourself available. You try to provide every level of help that you can to folks who are going through those things, but not everybody's going to get there, you know, and not everybody. So, you know, to go back to the relationship that I have with my parents, and our relationship with mental health over time, you know, you have people who everybody has somebody in their family like this, I'm sure.
And sometimes it's cultural too, right? I mean, who knows how that develops over time, but there are definitely certain stigmas culturally within our area. I mean, you know, wherever you are in the country, wherever you are right now when you're listening to this, you know people who, well, we don't talk about that because,
right,
you know, and
Sure.
there's some sort of...
Well, famously, I think that, you know, so again, Allentown's a majority Latino city now. I think that it's no secret that and I don't say like our Latino culture, but I'll say our various different Latino cultures don't necessarily deal with this stuff in the same way that, you know, U.S. culture does. And it even shows up in the vocabulary. I was talking to a woman from Colombia who's a mindfulness practitioner, and we were just like trying to figure out, like, how do you say this in Spanish? Like, we're Spanish speakers, but we didn't have a word for,
it doesn't translate,
certain things, right? Or there's like this clunky phrases around mindfulness even. It's like, how would we say this in our language? Like, we don't really have a word for it. So when you can see that, and that's part of what I also try to do in Allentown, is create that dialogue with Latinos, with Spanish speakers, and make sure that they understand that addressing mental health is something they don't have to do all by themselves. They've got resources available to them, and they really should embrace it.
You make a good point, though. When there's not even words for it in
Sure.
somebody's language, how do you start, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and you
absolutely.
start, and but there's words for things like stigma. There's
yeah.
right,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
There's words for
The negative
help,
stuff.
right?
Right.
There's words for you can find a way to talk around it ultimately. But bringing people out and getting people, I think a lot of people work through their kids. This is one of the things that I'm excited about in our city is that we have a school district that is actively engaged in the mental health of students. And when young people are starting to talk about these things, they help their parents. My youngest daughter has been on a mental health journey that has helped me learn a ton. She helped me understand things around dialectical behavioral therapy that are like part of my everyday vocabulary now.
Right.
And I've introduced it to, I think about the my own cabinet, my team at the city of Allentown. We talk about, I'm doing the best that I can and I can do better. This is like a frequent phrase that I remember pulling out of my experiences in dialectical behavioral therapy. That is a favorite of our police chief now, who's, you're constantly, it's always hard, but there's always an opportunity to do better without also making it conditional upon doing better, right? Like, it's a struggle, and we recognize that. Right. So there's lots of different ways to talk about these things. It's mayors are involved, teachers are involved, your children are involved. We're going to find a way for
police
for you
officers.
to talk. Everybody's part of this.
Yeah, we've had your police chief on this podcast, and kudos to the Allentown Police Department for putting mental health as a priority, the mental health of the community.
Yeah, it's the community. It's of the officers. We're in it's an amazing time to be alive, right? Like it's remarkable that when there's national dialogues about the epidemic of loneliness, that this is what the Surgeon General is talking about in 2024. Everybody remembers C. Everett Koop as a Surgeon General back in the 80s, and at that time it was like about smoking, and eventually it became about sexually transmitted diseases like AIDS. Now it seems like we are talking about the national dialogue is around mental health, and it's so foundational. It's so foundational to some of the other behaviors. It's an exciting time to be able to talk about these things.
Absolutely.
So this has been an excellent conversation to this point, Mayor Tuerk. I do have to say, if someone is tuning into this podcast and they kind of have one takeaway from this conversation that we've had today, what do you kind of hope that takeaway is?
So, like, if I reflect back on my story, and I was lucky enough that my wife was able to step in and do something. I was lucky enough to have these resources. I think the big takeaway is that you just I go back to, I'm a punk rocker. In punk rock, it was like about DIY, do it yourself, right? And I can remember, the punk rock ethos was like, just do something, man. Like, whatever, if you don't like what you see, just do something about it. And sometimes, that was like, well, if I don't like I don't like that band's t-shirt, I'm going to do my own t-shirt, right? Or, and with mental health, I think the one takeaway is you just have to start somewhere. Yeah. You've just got to
talk to one person.
Talk to any person. And if that person is not in your life, send an email to the mayor's office.
There you go.
Right?
Send an email to the mayor. You heard it, Crockett.
I'm ready for it. And, or find me on Twitter and Instagram, or my staff will hate me saying this because they feel like I'm too available, but I think that it is important for leaders to be available, right?
You're right.
There's somebody who can help you, and it doesn't you don't have to be in crisis to reach out to somebody. And so if you're in Allentown and you're struggling, I think there's a host of resources that are available through our county.
As always, the county has good resources. Go to your primary care doc.
Yep.
Go to your, local clinic, where, wherever you can go where there's a helping professional, somebody will listen. And as always at St. Luke's, we're available for your behavioral health needs for sure.
Absolutely. So there's resources all over. But if you just don't know where to start, like just grab, talk to somebody on the street.
Don't just grab a person. Don't grab a person, Mayor.
No.
Yeah.
Don't grab, but say, but I'm out on the street. You can find me walking on Hamilton Street.
Right. No
say
grabbing,
hello.
Mayor Tuerk.
Say hello and say, hey, I need some help. And we're going to find help for you in the Lehigh Valley.
We'll get there together. We're a team.
A good team.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So again, you can email him directly if you need some help, or if you're just going to a punk rock show, you want somebody to go with.
That's it. I'm here for it.
Here's Mayor Matt Tuerk.
If you want to run, I'm a 4 times a week at least runner. You'll see me running in Hamilton Street or running in the parks. There's always somebody out there who you can join.
I think that's wonderful. I won't be joining you running. But anybody that runs, hey, go run with Mayor Tuerk.
Yeah.
She's not in for running, but I think Amie and I are in for that next punk rock show.
Oh, I'm in for punk rock.
Okay.
Find a pit to throw ourselves around in. We can get after it there. Listen, Mayor Tuerk, you've been an open book, and that's certainly something we strive for in this podcast. And thank you so much for being so open. Thank you so much for wrapping your arms around Allentown and the Lehigh Valley and saying, hey, we're here and here to help. Of course, St. Luke's doing this podcast. That's exactly what the whole point of this thing is. Amie, as always, thank you for your knowledge and insight. And I just think this was an excellent conversation. So thank you to both of you today for having a good talk.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thanks again, Crockett. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you.
Absolutely. It's the Just Start the Conversation podcast, episode 30. Brought to you by St. Luke's University Health Network. For Allentown Mayor Matt Tuerk, for Amie Alanson Dundon, my name is Kevin Crockett. Thank you, as always, for checking out the Just Start the Conversation podcast.